So welcome today. My name is Margot, and I'm going to be presenting Direct Quarantine for Outlook. So this is the agenda of what we're going to present today. So Direct Quarantine for Outlook, as the name might imply, we've actually created an add-on for our quarantine functions that's integrated directly into Outlook. So basically, this is a tool meant for end users, but it's also made to make your lives a little easier. And what this does, it gives people a live view of their quarantine messages. So they no longer have to wait for a quarantine report or try to figure out where to log into the web quarantine if they've forgotten how to use it. They actually see a live view of whatever messages are stored in their quarantine at any given moment. And by doing this, it allows them to search for messages. So if they think they've got a false positive, or if they're looking for a particular message that hasn't arrived in their inbox and they're worried that it might be trapped in the quarantine by mistake, they have the ability to search through the quarantined emails. And if they do find a false positive, then it's easy for them to release it themselves. They can also control their whitelist and blacklist. So by looking through the messages, they can decide whether they want to whitelist or blacklist any of the senders. They also have these controls available for messages that are in the inbox as well. They can whitelist someone directly from the inbox. And all of this, as I mentioned, all happens directly within Outlook. So we've incorporated all of the main quarantine functions directly into the Outlook interface. So, simply put, we try to provide a seamless experience to your end users. So that means they're working with an interface that they're already familiar with. There's no learning curve, and it makes it a whole lot easier when they've got everything right in front of them. And it gives them complete control over the quarantine content. And by doing so, we're maintaining the highest level of security possible. So we're not actually downloading the messages to Outlook. We're simply providing them a list of what is in the quarantine. And when they do connect through to the database, the connection is encrypted. So even if there is a false positive or some sensitive information in there, it's completely secure. And more important for you guys, it relieves you of having to look for errant messages, releasing them for the users. You don't have to deal with those phone calls several times a day. And here we go. This is what it looks like. So as I said, we tried to make it as easy as possible, make it look and feel like Outlook itself. And so here you see we've created new folders. So it contains all of the messages that are stored on ModusGate. As I mentioned, they are not downloaded to Outlook. And they can see an up-to-date count of how many messages they are currently in there that they haven't read yet or looked through yet. And it automatically synchronizes in the background. So if they've got Outlook open, they're working elsewhere in another folder, the messages get synchronized in the background to reduce the impact on Outlook itself. So when they come back in here and click on the folder, they can see a live refreshed view of whatever messages are stored there. And in the message list, it works exactly the same way as Outlook. So they can see the from, the sender address, the subject, all the usual header information that you normally see with a message. But we've also added a content type column. So we've categorized each of the messages based on whether it's spam, virus, phishing, forbidden attachment, etc. So they can see at a glance what's in the message and what the filter thinks it contains. And as well, the users have very familiar controls with the message list. So they can click on any column header and sort the messages according to that particular column. Now, attachments, viruses, phishing, all the dangerous content, as I mentioned, is not actually downloaded to Outlook. So we keep things as safe as possible for the end users. And there's no possibility of accidentally releasing malware on their systems. Now, we also take advantage of Outlook's search function. So if they've got the extended search or they're just using the built-in search box that's there, it's easy to look for a particular message based on subject, sender, all of the criteria that are available in that column, those columns. And if they're familiar with using the Windows desktop, they can also use that as well to search for messages. Now, most end users aren't completely familiar with using the right-click or context menu, but we do have all of the functions built into both the context and the toolbar button, and we'll review the toolbars in a second. So if they need to release a message, they've got all of the functions that they have available to them now through the quarantine reports and WebQuarantine. So they can just simply release a message, or they can release it and trust the sender at the same time, or they could release the message and report it to us as legitimate so that we can adjust our filters. And as I mentioned, these functions are also available in the toolbar, which is probably more comfortable for most users. And they have access to the trust sender and block sender options from here as well. Now, again, as I mentioned, the trust sender and block sender functions are available both while you're working in the quarantine folder and in your inbox or any other folder. The release mechanisms are specific to the quarantine, so they will only be active while you're working in the quarantine folder. And so you probably want to know how to set it up, what it looks like in terms of your configuration. Now, we have made really strong effort not to make any changes, structural changes to Modusgate itself. So if you've got currently a 4.7 or a 5.0 version of Modusgate, you do not have to upgrade to support this add-on. All we do is simply give you a file that you install on the Modusgate server itself. It adds the quarantine server service, and that's what the users use to connect and communicate with your Modusgate quarantine. Now, in terms of the server setup, as I mentioned, all you need to do is install the service file on the Modusgate server, and it has to be on the same machine as the Modusgate itself, so either the VM or the software that you have. And it provides the communication layer between the email clients and the Modusgate server. Now, for clients, you're installing the add-on directly onto the user's machines, but we make it easy for you by allowing you to use a group policy object through your Active Directory. Now, for the requirements, for the client side, we made it as flexible as possible. So their Windows platforms could be either 32-bit or 64. They could be running XP, Vista, or 7. The thing that they absolutely need to have installed on the end server, and we give you the information for setting this up, is to set up .NET Framework. And for now, for this first version only, it supports Outlook 2007. Now, we are already working on providing 2003-2010 version support, and that will be coming out in a very short time. For the server requirements, as I mentioned, you could be using either 4.7 or 5. Doesn't matter. You do not have to upgrade if you're using either one of these versions. As long as you have Exchange Server on the back end, you can work with the GPO deployment through the Active Directory. Now, for the operating system, again, you could be using Windows 2003, 2008, or 2008 R2. These are all supported. Again, you'd need to have .NET Framework 3.5 on the server, but if you're already using Modusgate with the web components, then you already have that. Active Directory through the use of GPO deployment. Now, the only proviso here in terms of the quarantine database setup is that it must be installed on a SQL server. Any version, we mentioned 2000 here, but 2008 is also supported. Some people have legacy systems where they might be using Access or some other form of quarantine database, but to support this particular add-on, you must be using a SQL server. Now, for pricing, I'm just going to let you look at this for a few seconds. As you see that the more mailboxes you have, the more the price goes down. So we tried to make this as affordable as possible. And renewal and updates are really quite low. So we are going to make it available for April 19th. That's the actual release date. And the next version that will support 2003-2010 is coming out in June, so a couple of months' time. Now, if you're thinking, okay, most of my users are only on 2003, why should I get it now? Because you get a discount if you get it now. So we will be able to support all versions of Outlook in just a couple of months' time, and you can get a discount by going ahead and buying it now. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. And I want to check to see if you guys have any questions.